Hello everyone, I'm Priyadarshini Mara, faculty at the Department of Buddhist Studies, University of Delhi. Today I would be discussing module number 20 with you, and this module is constituted in paper number 11 of Philosophy of Buddhism. Now when we look at this module, we see that it is titled as 3 Characteristics of Consciousness. And this is called Trisvabhava. When we talk about 3 characteristics of consciousness or Trisvabhava, we see that this particular doctrine was given by the Yogacara school of Buddhism. If you remember, then in our other modules where we discussed about the philosophy of Yogacara Buddhism, we have in detail, not really in detailed exposition, but in summarized way, we have already talked about 3 characteristics of consciousness. However, here we are going to deal with these 3 characteristics in details. Now, before we get into Trisvabhava, I would give you a brief background of the Yogacara school, because in between we skipped a lot of modules that were not of Yogacara, so I guess you must have forgotten. So here I would be repeating a bit of Yogacara school for you. So the Buddhist philosophical school of Yogacara was established in the frames of Mahayanist Buddhism, and it is one of the most complex and interesting phenomena of the philosophical trends of traditional India. It exerted notable influence not only on the formation of Buddhist philosophical thinking in different regions of Buddhist world like China, Tibet, Korea, but also on the native cultural tradition of those regions as well. It rather enough to mention here non-Confucian branch of Zisu in its historical development from Wang Yangming up to such contemporary post-Confucius as Liang Shumei and especially Zhongxi. But the researches into these trends of thought have not been completed yet. Thus, in the Russian Buddhist studies, with an exception of the classical works of Shabasky dedicated to the logical epistemological branch existing in the frames of Yogacara, particularly there are no serious studies of this school, and the scholarly translations of the principal text of Yogacara are also lacking. Here, I would like to discuss the question of existence of different trends within the frames of this philosophical school. It is usually conceived that synonymous name for the title Yogacara, which is school of the practice of yoga, is Vigyanvad, and that is the doctrine of consciousness. The maxim, all 3 worlds are mind only, its locus is Bhumika Sutra, thus Bhumika Sutra, and expresses the principal doctrinal essence of this school as teaching which examines mainly just the problems of mind and consciousness. But not all the representatives of this school used the term Vigyanvad for its self-denomination. It is also true regarding other denominations of Yogacara which are also conceived to be synonymous, like Vikyapti Matrita, Chit Matrita, etc. It must be said that every outstanding representative of this school who established the sub-school of his own preference to use his own denomination of his new branch. This difference in self-denomination reflected rather subtle distinctions between the trends developing in the frames of the general paradigm of the Yogacara thinking. On these foundations, it seems to be possible to define the following sub-traditions of this school of Buddhist philosophy. Sub-tradition of Asang, the exact name of which is Chit Matra. Chit Matra means psychical only or mind only. It can be qualified as psychological idealism. Sub-tradition of Vasubandhu, developed by his disciples and especially by Dharmapal. The exact name of this trend is Vigyapti Matra, which means conscious only, or also as Vigyanvad, that point means the doctrine of consciousness. It can be qualified as the Buddhist phenomenology of consciousness. Sub-tradition of Dignath, Dharmkirti, originated from Vasubandhu's sub-tradition. As it is well known, Dignath was a disciple of Vasubandhu and Dharmkirti was a disciple of Dharmpal. And its proper name is, when we talk about the sub-tradition of Dignath and Dharmkirti, which originated from Vasubandhu's sub-tradition, we see that it is called Swatantrik Yogacara. It can be qualified as logico-epistemological branch of the Yogacara school. So we see that we have different exponents coming in and spreading or taking further, bringing out certain trends from the Yogacara school. Yogacara define 3 characteristics of consciousness. When we talk about Yogacara idealism, they are pointing out to refutation of any external entity other than the mind. So mind for them is the only real thing, and rest everything, even the body and that which lies beyond the mind, is mere mental construction. So now they give 8 types of consciousness, which includes all the types of sense organ consciousness, then Klisht Manovinyan, and then Alya Vinyan, and along with the sense organs, there is mind. So that together makes 8 types of consciousness. Now they define 3 characteristics of these consciousness, and that is called Trisvabhava Nirdesh. Is an extremely significant treatise written by the Yogacara master Vasubandhu. Now this treatise consists of 38 stanzas explaining the concept of 3 natures or 3 swabhav, or the 3 distinguishing characteristics called 3 lakshan. So here when we look at the 3 swabhav nirdesh, we see that it is one of the most important texts of Yogacara school, and it consists of 38 stanzas, and these stanzas explain the concept of 3 natures, which is known as 3 swabhav, or the 3 distinguishing characteristics known as 3 lakshan. It is primarily an exposition of the ontological basis of the subject-object dichotomy as understood in terms of Yogacara view, and is very important because it answers all fundamental questions raised concerning how we view the world in which we live. Here, Vasubandhu's aim is to show that the subject-object dichotomy that exists between the emerging ground consciousness, which is Alya Vinyan, and the ground of all phenomena, which is Dharm Dhatu, is born from a misapprehension of single reality that can be termed as Tathta. That which misapprehends this greater reality are all sentient beings born in the world. But the root of this misapprehension is created by the all-ground consciousness itself, which acts as a spell enchanting beings into believing in the facetity of the world in which they live. Now, when we talk about the three intrinsic natures, they are posited by Vasubandhu as the conceptually constructed, which is known as Parikalpit nature. Then we have the contingent nature, which is known as Paratantra, and then the actual nature, which is known as Parinispan. So these three natures that Vasubandhu gives is first the conceptually constructed nature, which means Parikalpit, then the contingent nature, which means Paratantra, and then we have the actual nature, which means Parinispan. This theory was put forward to explain not only the illusion of world that we see around us, but also the unreality as to how it is created. We find that the world is product not of one but three simultaneous realities. The conceptual nature, Parikalpit, and when we talk about these three simultaneous realities, we have Parikalpit, Parinispan and Paratantra. So let us begin with the conceptual nature. When we talk about conceptual nature, it is called Parikalpit. The imagined one of the three natures, Trisvabhava, according to Yogacara philosophy, is Parikalpit. It denotes the unreal, which means Parikalpit, and this denotation of the unreal is the duality of perceiving subject and perceived objects that have been projected onto reality by dependent nature or Paratantra, and this results in the existence of an individual in samsara. So just listen to it once again so that you get what I'm trying to say here is when we talk about three natures or three swabhav according to Yogacara philosophy, we say that it denotes the unreal, which means Parikalpit, and this unreal duality of perceiving subject and perceived objects that have been projected onto reality by dependent nature, which means Paratantra, and this results in the existence of an individual in samsara. The world that is perceived, and for it to be perceived, there must be subject and object dichotomy. And the world that is perceived is described as a perceptual construction, which is known as Kalpana, or conceived world in the sense of something that isn't there being perceived or thought to be there. Insofar as it is the perceptual construct, its nature is said to be conceptually constructed, and that is Parikalpit. This projection, as such, occurs as a simultaneous arising of the subject and the object. Vasubandhu, however, asserts that the conceptually constructed, which is Parikalpit, nature of reality by virtue of precisely what it is has to be unreal and non-existent. See, when we talk about Vasubandhu, he asserts that the conceptually constructed nature of reality, by virtue of precisely what it is, has to be unreal and non-existent. It is an illusion. Nevertheless, the conception that occurs, the experience of the subject and object dichotomy, is a play of various existent causes and conditions. This contrivance or vikalp of various causes and conditions is described as the contingent or paratantra nature of reality. Behind that play of causes and conditions, there must be an underlying actual nature, and this nature is called parinispan. The actuality is the unreality of contrived construct. Imaginary nature comes into being when the mind or consciousness applies its function of discriminating the ideas and proceeding from the storehouse consciousness, that is, to dependent nature, the object of imagination. Now let us see for an example, being ignorant of the truth that all beings are ideation only, the mind consciousness ascribes to them the property of independent reality and comes up with such notions as permanent self and permanent objects. So when we, for example, we see that being ignorant of the truth that all beings are ideation only. They are all ideas of the mind. We place the mind consciousness to them, and this mind consciousness further ascribes the property of independent reality and comes up with such notions as permanent self and permanent objects. These properties which the mind consciousness falsely attributes to ideas, but which are actually what is meant to be by imaginary nature. Perfect nature is the correct comprehension of imaginary as imaginary, which arises when the objective character which the mind consciousness wrongly imputes to ideas is finally realized to be void. The ultimate reality on which these three natures are imposed, almost like veils, is defined as tathata, that is pure noumena. The contingent paratantra nature, the real form of phenomenal existence, free from verbal expression, the world of dependent origination, that is pratiti samutpat. The knowledge by which reality is examined is paratantra. Nothing is self-existent in the world. Everything depends on other for its existence. Things are all produced as mutually conditioned. The definition of paratantra as given in the verse 20 of Trimsika. Trimsika is one of the texts of Yogacara school. It presents paratantra as discrimination is produced by cause and condition, which indicate only the defiled paratantra, that is vikalp. Now pure paratantra is not vikalp, it is much as parinispan as paratantra. In the other word, that all minds and their associates, whether defiled or pure, are designated by the word vikalp. They are all capable of apprehending and perceiving objects. Therefore, the definition which is mentioned in the verse includes both the pure and defiled paratantras. So, the actual parinispan nature, which is the ultimate reality, is complete and perfect, and it is real nature of all the dharma, which is revealed by knowledge of Pudgal. Shunyata and Dharma Shunyata. So this Parinispan, when we talk about, we say that it is the ultimate reality and is complete and perfect real nature of all the dharma, which is revealed by the knowledge of Pudgal Shunyata and Dharma Shunyata. The expression Parinispan indicates universality, eternity, and reality we see when we look into Parinispan. Universality, when we talk about, is lacking in nowhere of the nature. When we talk about eternity, we say that non-birth, non-destruction. Then its reality, its non-falseness. It is different from the individual characteristics of dharma, which is not universal. And it is also different from the common characteristic, which is eternal, and from space and the self, which are not real. The explanation of Trisvabhava with an example will be presented here in order to make you understand what it is. To elaborate, we see Vasubandhu resorts to an analogy. So he gives an analogy or a situation. He says that let us consider a situation in which a magician using certain spells or mantras or tricks causes before a crowd of spectators a log of wood to appear and become as an elephant. The fact that no elephant is there, but nevertheless is seen to be there by the audience, may be defined as elephant's parikalpit nature. In that sense, the spectators imagine or project something that factually is not present. The elephant is no more than a magician's illusion, and yet the elephant is indeed seen. When we talk about hallucination, it means akriti. The illusion that is seen of the elephant by the crowd may be defined as the situation's paratantra nature. This means that the appearance of illusion itself must be contingent on something else. Finally, we see, if we consider what the elephant really is in itself, that is a suggested image that is not really there, then its actual non-existence is its ultimately true or actual nature. That becomes Parinispan. So we see that Vasubandhu gives an analogy of elephant who is being constructed by a magician. Vasubandhu then goes on to explain his analogy as follows. The all-ground consciousness, which means Alya Vinyan, is the magic spell with which cosmic ideation, which is Vikalp, the magician magically produces the illusion of a universe, and in which duality of subject and object becomes the result. The elephant is the universe that appears to us as real. The original log of wood, which has been misapprehended as illusory elephant, is Tathata, or the absolute that ever remains unchanged and pure from the beginning. With the non-apprehension of duality, the appearance of duality collapses, and with this collapse, the actual nature is realized as the non-existence of duality. When we look at Trisvabhava Nirdesh, verse number 33, we see the nature or swabhav of reality is ultimately non-dual, which means that neither an apprehender nor objects to be apprehended exist as such. Each of these three forms should not be regarded as independent existence, but as the forms that appear to be different individuals according to their existential attitudes towards reality. Through ultimate transcendental wisdom, which denies an illusional superimposition of reality, a person comes to understand the essence of the phenomenal world as emptiness or shunyata. Now, this emptiness or shunyata is the form perfectly attained, which points out to Parinispan Swabhav. Thereupon, one clearly sees the true nature of phenomena as it is without verbal fiction, that is, in the form of Paratantra Swabhav. In short, what can be said is that Paratantra is the pivot that transforms the illusion of Parikalpit to the enlightenment of Parinispan. The three Swabhav is inseparably connected with the practical purpose of Yogachar, as knowledge of the doctrine can enable one to break through the painful chain of death and rebirth or samsara, and also to attain the state of enlightenment or nirvana. Several conclusions can be drawn from the above analysis of three natures or three Swabhav, and it is present in this text called Sandhi Nirmochan Sutra. It agrees in outline with the characterization of the three natures in the text, but also develops it further along the line of ideation only philosophy of Yogachar Buddhism. Secondly, we see that just as in the Sutra, dependent nature in the text refers to the realm of birth and death, which results from man's failure to comprehend the conditioned nature of all entities. In the ontology of Mahayana Sutra, this failure signifies the construction of an imaginary world of real selves and objects out of various categories of ideas. This is the reason dependent nature is depicted as the support of false discriminations or imaginary nature on the one hand, and it is also said to proceed from them on the other hand. Finally, we have perfect nature, which indicates the liberation from the cycle of mutual generation of dependent and the imaginary, when all entities are perceived as they actually are, that is, ideas only. Looking at the third state, we see that so far as sentient beings are either non-enlightened or enlightened, dependent nature always exists either as imaginary nature or as perfect nature. For ideas are either the ideas of non-enlightened and so are the product of false imagination, or the ideas of the enlightened, in which case all unfounded hypotheses have disappeared. So this is the idea of the three Swabhav. Now we have certain criticisms of the Yogachar version of three Swabhav. To sum up, the following comments can be made on sections on the three natures in the treatise. First is this section consists of two parts. The first part is chiefly on the dual aspects of three natures, while in the second part we see that it is mainly concerned with establishing the unity of the three natures. The description of the three natures found in these two parts, with the exception of perfect nature, do not exactly correspond. Secondly, we see that the detailed discussion on the dual aspects of three natures is given by fast sang, most probably with the intention of showing that long-standing disagreement between Madhyamik and the Yogacharans on the subject of three natures is actually unreal, and that when correctly interpreted, these three nature doctrine, traditionally closely allied to Yogachar Buddhism, can be used to illustrate the Madhyamik principle of middle way. And this brings us to the end of Yogachar Trisvabhava, or the nature of consciousness, which is divided into three types. One is Parikalpit, then we have Paratantra, and in the end we have Parinispan. So, from above studies, we come to know the true nature of reality based on characteristic of consciousness. These three characteristics are, however, interrelated to each other. Here, it is important to understand that Yogachar philosophy, before evaluation of this basic nature of object, so they bring out the three natures of consciousness. Three natures are the root of consciousness, and from the object on the cause and effect relation, we see that these three natures are essentially associated with the 8 types of consciousness that is given by the Yogachar school. When the Yogachar school says that it is only the mind that is real and everything else that lies beyond the mind, or even the body for that matter, is unreal. When we talk about unreality or refutation of the objects lying outside the mind, we say that the process of understanding them is done with the help of 8 types of consciousness. Now, these 8 types of consciousness are further understood through 3 natures or characteristics of consciousness, and that is called Trisvabhava or 3 natures, which is Parikalpit, Paratantra, and the ultimate nature, which points out to the understanding or apprehension of things as they are, and that is Parinispan. So these are the 3 natures of consciousness as given out by the Yogachar school. Thank you.